Hello, everyone, and welcome to this bonus episode of the Hired Geek Podcast, episode number 86, that is exploring the Unschooled documentary film that I had the chance to get a kind of press screening of. I was planning on seeing it on site at South by Southwest EDU when that was still planning to happen in March. So in lieu of that, thankfully, I was still able to watch the film, still able to talk with the folks that are involved in making it and promoting it. So it is a film that's exploring self-directed learning for high school students and kind of below, students at a variety of ages. But it's taking place at the Natural Creativity Center in Philadelphia. They're just doing really interesting work that sort of, they describe it, in the podcast, but really just as kind of reimagining the homeschool model is technically what their organization is classified as. It's not a charter school or anything like that, but it was just a really fascinating conversation. It really helped me to process something that was definitely pretty foreign to me, obviously being more so in the higher ed world, but we get into examining how, there's some kind of connective tissue there of how students who are going through self-directed learning are as well or perhaps better prepared for their success in college. So really great stuff, great resources to check out in the show notes. Be sure to subscribe to their newsletter so that you can know when they're going to have any more screenings or how this movie might be released to be viewed on demand in the near future. And definitely check out all their resources that they have on their website, as well as all the things that I mentioned in this episode in the show notes. So thanks so much for listening. And without further ado, this is episode number 86 with Chris Steinmeier and Bonnie Benjamin Ferris. So really appreciate you, Bonnie and Chris, hanging out for the podcast here. We have a lot to discuss about this awesome documentary I had the pleasure of checking out recently, Unschooled. So we're going to talk a lot about just the film at large and kind of how it got to be made, but also just sort of the educational philosophies behind the Natural Creativity Center that is highlighted in the film. So I really appreciate both of your time. But we'll start out. We'll start with you, Chris. We'll start out kind of as we always do. If you just want to give a real brief introduction of yourself, a little bit of your background. And we'll start with you, Chris, and then we'll go to you, Bonnie.
Sure. I'm Chris Steinmeier, co-director of the Natural Creativity Center in Philadelphia. We're in the Germantown neighborhood. I got into the work of self-directed education when I had the epiphany in grad school that I was a great student and a pretty mediocre adult. I had always done well in school, knew how to get A's, and then I got out into the real world and had no earthly idea what to do with myself. And so I went into teaching. In doing so, it helped me open up and figure out a lot more about what learning actually was, what the purpose, the role, and the connections. And so I taught in private schools, public schools, Montessori, a juvenile justice program, ended up back in grad school because I wanted to do something more, but I didn't know what. And that I happened to have a professor turn over an article on the modernization of homeschooling and how it wasn't just this fringe thing anymore. And it just piqued my curiosity. I got really invested, really interested, ended up writing my dissertation on non-religious homeschoolers in and around Philadelphia, and then came to learn of the impending opening of what would become Natural Creativity.
Very cool. Bonnie, if you just want to give a quick intro of your background.
Sure. Bonnie Benjamin Ferris. And Dustin, thank you so much for having us today. My role on this project is as the impact director for the film and the campaign. And that's really how I've spent the lion's share of my career. I live at this nexus of media and story and change. I started my career the first decade at PBS, the next decade at the Walt Disney World Company, and then I ran Vulcan Productions, which is the media company of the late co-founder of Microsoft's Paul Allen. And where I live and what brings me joy is to help use the power of story to bring people together to leave the world better than we found it. And so it's a joy to be here today with you.
Yeah. Thank you both so much for making the time. Really quick, Bonnie, just to kind of give a little bit of foundation. So, um, I'm very curious, like, because I think this is, I mean, it's a unique school, a unique model, and like, this could have just been happening on its own, but we were lucky enough to be able to kind of see it happen through this film. So I'm curious, like, how did this film come to be? Even because I think, again, yeah, it's just something that maybe it could have been just such a small and quiet, kind of intimate thing that was happening on its own. But again, we got the chance to see it through this documentary. So how did it come to be?
No, I love it. And the documentary film is called Unschooled. And it started out as a film about the revolutionary alternatives to traditional education. And its genesis by the executive producers was they had personal experience with this kind of self-directed education model. The film quickly morphed as after filming began into a story about the larger issues facing us as a whole and the educational systems that are offered to our young people today. The film itself follows the work of Natural Creativity, where Chris is the co-director, and a group of very brave families who seek an alternative to traditional education the traditional models that are not serving their children. The filmmakers were intrigued to document the journey of the three young people you meet in the film as they put this model of self-directed education to the test. I also want to say that I think this film and reimagining how we think about education and learning is so profoundly important in general and particularly powerfully important today. Never more so, because 9 out of 10 young people are learning in their home right now. And so
Mm-hmm.
nothing's really going to be the same. And so not only is this global pandemic a profound challenge on lots of levels, but it's also an opportunity to really rethink and reimagine what we think of as learning and how we support our children's learning. So that's what we hope this film will do.
Yeah, very admirable goal and definitely very intriguing. You're saying this unique self-directed educational model and something that a lot of people may not be familiar with. And Chris, I'll give this one to you. Again, it's something pretty unique, and certainly it's like this question could be taken kind of like all things being equal, or certainly in this unique context that we're in now. Do you think that this kind of general model of self-directed learning, in K through 12, do you think that, it's something that should be more prevalent and that's what you hope maybe kind of like people take away? Or is this something that you feel like is really valuable in those smaller, more intimate kind of places? I was just curious. That's something that came to me when I was watching this. Of just like, is this something that like the intention is that like every school everywhere should be doing this for all students all the time, or is it like useful as this very unique, intimate kind of alternative that people could kind of opt into?
Well, as we often talk about at Natural Creativity, whenever presented with an either or, we always try and look for the and so I think that this makes a lot of sense as a both. In one way, the principles, the ideas of turning over more autonomy, more control over content to individual families, individual communities, makes so much sense, and I wish that would be much more prevalent. On the other hand, I don't think there is one right way. It's almost like if we were to develop a sort of constitution of self-directed education that many people could share in the practices, but do it in ways that make sense for their particular context, it would be really, really great. It's almost like what the origins of the charter school movement were, where the idea is how do we have a bunch of different approaches, a bunch of different laboratories for innovation, and see what comes up. And so I think we'd really be excited to find out all over the world that people were taking some of these principles and making them really specific to their communities and their needs.
So yeah, I mean, I think that's like a really interesting way to look at it, which that's also what I love, is just sort of the like open-mindedness generally. That feels like kind of resonated with me, of just seeming to be a very core value of like, yeah, it's not everything's there's a lot of shades of gray, like everything's very nuanced and like in depth, and those sort of things, of that idea of, like people could be inspired to kind of remix and mash up that idea of like, more autonomy and, bringing in more self-direction into learning as it makes sense in all the variety of kind of context that anybody might be learning within. So, but I think too, and this is kind of more overarching in terms of just like the production of the film. So I'll give this one to you, Bonnie, really quick, of just like, again, it's so unique and, stuff that anybody might not be as familiar with or comfortable with in terms of like when they think about sending their kid to school. You explore sort of a lot of that skepticism in this film. So I was just curious of like, what made that important for you to show? Because I feel like there's a version of a movie like that, like a documentary like this, where it's just very like, everything's perfect, not, like they're trying to really kind of like hype it up and like just ignore any sort of criticism. So I was just curious, why was it important, I think, to highlight that it was kind of a brave choice for these families to buy into this model and those sort of things. So just kind of a production question of like including that in the film.
What a great question. And one of the things that I think is so powerful about this film is that it's not all tied up in a neat little ribbon of perfection. We meet 3 young people and their families and their parents who all have various degrees of skepticism around whether this is the right way to go. And we follow their journey, both the family's journey, the parents' journey, and the young people's journey into figuring out if this is right for them. And I think the film, I know the film really is an instigator, is a fuel for the kinds of questions all of us ask when we think about what's best for our children, what kind of environment is best for them, how can we set them up for success. And so you put your finger right on it. The film very deliberately is I'll use the word messy in a sense that it's not this linear process of perfection. You see the whole trajectory, including doubts along the way.
Yeah, like learning is a complicated process, like anywhere, and the fact that like it's like self-directed and just sort of kind of done in like this scrappy way, but it was so powerful to see like those breakthrough moments and when things were really really clicking into place for the students. So I think it just feels so authentic in a way that just feels very human to like include that kind of raw part of it that's like not like clean and tight and all that sort of thing. So
if I might build on that, the messiness is really an important part of it. So I was glad that Bonnie used that exact word. When we're working with new families, people who are interested in supporting us, people who would like to find out more about how to apply this approach or what the sort of challenges are, we really want to engage with the doubts, the concerns, the things that they're worried about, because those are real and will impact what their journey is. And so we want those to be out in front of people. Also, the idea that when you turn over the keys to the vehicle to a young person, there's a potentially a misconception where the job for the adult gets easier. And that's actually, in our experience in our coaching, very much not the case. And so we like to be upfront about that and really sit with the messiness.
Gotcha. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I mean, because I guess that's like probably, I'm sure, a common misconception is like, oh, well, like, like the student's doing all the work, it's self-directed, like, well, like you're just kind of sitting back and like doing whatever. So, so I think, I mean, that kind of segues really well. I mean, just going to you again, Chris, to start with this one of just like, just generally, and I love just like thinking of it in this way, of kind of like, in the geeky fashion, like learning is a human superpower. Like we, see patterns and like, develop things. And especially when we're younger, we're, learning so much so quickly and are just kind of sponges for all the things that are happening around us. And certainly now with so many more people, like we are kind of alluding to before, are essentially, homeschooling their children with, perhaps very little preparation. So, just looking at it in that way of like, creating more moments for learning, in young people's everyday life, whatever their age and wherever they are, um, you know, just talking through that of like, how do you create more moments for those things? And just, I guess taking the inspiration from the work that you're doing every day and how maybe others, who are now thrust into homeschooling their children, like how they can perhaps, create more of those kind of opportunities for learning in their, child's everyday life.
Sure. I think one of the ways that I like to begin diving into that is to first start to challenge the notion that we as adults have a responsibility to create learning opportunities. The sort of the superpower that you reference is built into us from birth, and some could make the argument even before that, where the neural connections, the ways that your brain is forming and understanding and interacting with the world, uh, is happening in ways that are rich and deep, even when the young person doesn't have the
Mm-hmm.
language to articulate it. And so the adult can increase access, exposure to new things, modeling of connection making between things that maybe aren't immediately apparent to the young person, but often also just get out of the way and observe. I think your comment about the the sponginess of young minds is really important right now, because they're soaking up a lot, and some things that I know parents I speak to would wish they didn't, about the state of the world, about the anxiety, the stress, just the general tone, and fear. Sort of a slow burn fight or flight for so many of us. And so our encouragement for people who find themselves in that situation with young people right now is to really be present with that emotional well-being, that sense of self, that sense of placemaking in the world, and maybe not necessarily going into the details of why this is, depending on the age of the young person and what kind of access they have, but really being present to their emotions, their feelings, what kinds of needs they're having, and even as some places start to open back up, you have young people that, for whatever the challenges have had weeks of really intense mom and dad time. And for some, that's going to come to a pretty abrupt change. Others not so quickly, but sort of being aware that young people experience these transitions in more profound ways than we've trained ourselves to as adults, and including that in any articulation of the learning process. Sort of learning how to be resilient people means being there with your parents as we model being resilient people.
I think that's interesting. Yeah, I mean, the way that you framed it of like almost kind of like letting yourself off the hook a little bit of like, in terms of like just like the learning, you can kind of take a coaching backseat perhaps a little bit and just sort of guide uh your child a little bit. And then so much of also just, yeah, like the disruption of routines and just sort of the fight or flight kind of stuff you mentioned too, of like almost more so where it might be valuable to step in is just like helping your child to feel safe, like try to like replicate the routine as much as you can, or just, yeah, to spend quality time and be helping them to feel loved and feel like they're having some fun or something, like those sort of things. But because, yeah, I'm sure that's just like a lot of pressure that some parents are putting on themselves. They're just like, oh, I gotta now be like a, like a teacher. Like, I don't know what I'm doing or whatever. And they're like, yeah, just getting so kind of worked up about that.
Yeah, I was speaking with a parent who was expressing great worry about her young person falling behind, and we sort of took some time to unpack what that really meant. And at the end of the conversation, she was able to be able to say, if I meet my child 20 years from now, and we're going to reflect back on this moment, like, I want my daughter to be able to know what to do in challenging times, much more than this week's fraction lessons.
Mhm.
Like there are going to be times that you can get back to those things and maybe incorporate them into what you're doing in other ways. I'm certainly happy to talk about some of those, but the idea of seeing yourself and your family as whole people, as part of a whole unit, and what that means for how you respond to these challenges, and how you treat yourself in these moments. I think your point about letting parents off the hook really comes from a sense of, um, it's important to care for yourself, because the ways that you manifest stress, the ways that you manifest your exhaustion, are going to be picked up by your young person. And it's also okay for them to see you as a person. And so the idea that we're all really trying to sort this out together gives your young people lots of content and process opportunities.
Well, I guess, just kind of moving on from that a little bit, just, the work that you're doing, it's with a variety of age groups, but I think for me and, some of my audience, like something that as kind of processed the film myself and just thinking about kind of fitting this film into the tapestry of, education at large and focusing a little bit more on like higher education. And, some of these students, they are preparing to go to college. So, I'll start here, I guess, with you, Bonnie, if you have any thoughts of just like where you see the power of self-directed education kind of, preparing young people really well, actually, for higher education, because you do have to really manage your own time that much more, when you're in school. And certainly if there's, kind of the quote unquote kind of flipped model, like you've got to go through a lot of content before you're coming in to class to discuss it. And you need to figure out how you are going to get through that content in an efficient way and sort of comprehend it. So yeah, just any thoughts on how this model is actually really well suited to help prepare students for higher education? We'll start with you, Bonnie, and then go to Chris.
It's a great question, Dustin. I think I'm quickly going to punt to Chris, who's really the expert on this. I will share as a parent that the whole idea of putting young people in the driver's seat of their learning is just so powerful and so important throughout your child's trajectory, leading up to higher education. And I can just speak as a parent and say that I think children who have, over the course of their educational trajectory, been in the driver's seat, just by its very definition, sets them up for success in higher education as they, slowly leave the nest. But now I'm going to punt to Chris, who really is the expert on this.
Uh, Thank you for that, Bonnie. Your usage of the term driver seat really brought to mind the image for me of someone who's been given opportunities in their teens with a skilled driver sitting next to them to practice driving, and then as they get older, to be able to go out and drive safely and responsibly, as opposed to someone who's never allowed to sit anywhere near the front seat for years and years and years and years. And then suddenly at 40, there's something comes up and you need to hop in the car and drive somewhere, and they've no idea what to do. Um, the approach that we take, and that so many other self-directed learning spaces do in their own context, is the idea that by developing those executive function skills early and having opportunities to practice them when sort of the stakes are lower, by the time you reach adulthood, you've got a lot more practice managing your life, managing your educational trajectory, managing your time, how you allocate your resources. And it's like when you look at certain schooling systems that are really heavily scaffolded towards getting young people to college, and then suddenly they're in college and those scaffolds are gone, it can be a really catastrophic sense of being overwhelmed. Whereas if the young person is given opportunities to practice before, taking on $100,000 loan, they can be not only better suited for the way that you manage your time, but also there's an opportunity for them to come in with a much clearer picture of what they hope to get out of it. At Natural Creativity, we sort of use the phrase "start with the goal in mind." When young people are interested in a project or interested in developing a skill, we ask, "So, to what end? How is this going to bring value into what you're doing? How is this going to enrich what you're doing?" And sometimes the answer is, "I just think it'll be fun." Cool. Sometimes it's, "Oh, I really, really want to start this business, or I really want to do this." And we are able to help them make connections to what they're doing so that they can see that process of making the connections and then start to practice it themselves.
Well, and I imagine just too, like it's that sort of experience is especially impactful just in terms of like the goal that any student would have in mind, especially in unschooled, like, you know, these are students who are kind of like, downtrodden, like they've been, not well served by their public school experience so far. So they've kind of now been caught and are getting the opportunity to get this more self-directed learning opportunity. So I'm curious, just in terms of those kind of structural inequities that are playing out, that we see in the film for those students, just maybe speaking kind of broadly of like, how does unschooling show up in these moments of kind of supporting those students who may have not been as well served in other educational environments, and how unschooling might be able to better serve them. So Chris, if you want to start with this, and we'll see, I guess, Bonnie, if you have anything you want to add.
Sure. Yeah, I think particularly with the young people in the movie, and having gotten to know them pretty well over the last several years, I think it's a challenge when you get this glimmer of who they are over 1-2 years, and some of the backstory of how they've gotten to that place, and then it's sort of, at times it can feel like the responsibility is on us to help them get out of that. And there's a certain amount of that we are totally happy to take on with the parents. But I think there's also the development of a sense of purpose and a sense of self that will drive them even when they leave us, even as they move on, so that they can continue to drive that process. It's those inequities. They aren't fixed. They aren't dissolved by a short window in a really cool place, as much as I wish they would be. Um, but what we focus on is, how do you, as an individual young person, and how do you as a family develop a creative and flexible sense of how you work with the resources you have, work within the systems, develop an understanding of how those systems work and interact, and decide when and how you want to engage with them. We're really hoping. I think there was a line in the movie about deciding whether or not to get up from the table, and I think there's a part of that, but there's also how do you really reconfigure the cards you're dealt in a way that can work to your advantage, and some of that is really identifying your strengths, identifying the ways that you can excel within those areas, but I also think it's specific to our problem solving approach that we take with young people and help them develop, so that regardless of what obstacles are in the way, they've got a skill set that allows them to work through them.
And I'll just interject that I think the other thing you see in this film that, Chris, I would love to have you talk to a bit, is the critical role of community and community engagement. You see it in the film. It's a important piece of natural creativity's place in the world, and speaks directly to some of the challenges of equity and accessibility that Dustin, you raised. So Chris, if you could talk a bit to that, I think that would be wonderful.
Sure. I think one of the goals when we first set out to start Natural Creativity that we've been uh, pretty true to, and there's always room for improvement, is very purposefully bringing together a diverse community, racially, socioeconomically, and in a way that allows every person to feel connected to a bunch of different people that they may not otherwise interact with. I think there was a study a few years back that said in urban centers, particularly in the Northeast, a student in an underserved neighborhood school, their world really looks like 8 square blocks from their house, and that can be really isolating and alienating from the larger society. And because we draw from across the city and beyond, and have a very local, neighborly feel, we have a lot of opportunities for individual young people and families to connect with people and families that they may not normally have had a chance to, and to really lean on those in different ways and find different ways to contribute. In particular, I'm thinking about right now, with the pandemic, the work that our facilitators and our families are doing to stay connected, to arrange for resource transfers, to arrange for people to have support around things like rent and utilities. Just the ways that we've been able to maintain and build our community have been really awe-inspiring as I sit back and do the behind-the-scenes work and watch them sort of really work super hard to keep the community together, and to see the families respond and feel connected. And even as we look at the Amani, Jaya, and Miles of the world, as they go out and still feel connected back with us. It's really that level of community and that type of intentional community that we really want to maintain and continue to improve upon, is really important to us.
Yeah, I think that's just I don't know. It's just like it just feels good of just like that idea of like, you know, again, yeah, like kind of the burden or the pressure of like how you're kind of acknowledging where it's like, well, we're not gonna, you know, certainly not like, you know, quickly or overnight of like solving these whole systemic kind of structural inequities, but you know, we can at least work on that individual level to build that capacity to have kind of the, you know, the confidence or the skill sets to be able to, um, you know, succeed in college or any of those things, you know, just kind of be able to press onward and move forward and move up, and achieve whatever goals, you know, that individual young person might have. Like that, just like, it's like, okay, yeah.
Supplement that with one of the pieces that I really like about this work is when a lot of people hear something like self-directed learning or child-led learning or whatever terminology they use, they tend to think of education as a very individualistic pursuit. And in many ways it is, but I think communities like Natural Creativity, like the other self-directed centers around the world, there's this creative tension of individual pursuits within a community environment. And so, where are the levels of each person's freedom? Where are their obligations to their community members? And it's a complex part about being a member of society. And I think that there's a lot of value in doing that work. And so, on one hand, individually, they're able to develop the skill set so that they can maneuver in the world in which they're presented, but also they develop a process awareness and a systems way of thinking to be able to use those skills to help improve the way the systems work for other people. So we're hoping that there's a ripple effect that grows out of the number of young people who get to experience this sort of learning environment.
Very important point to make, is yeah, like certainly we can really like in terms of like our emotions and different things, like, you know, control ourselves and like how we react to things. But yeah, we also do live in communities and live in the world. And like, you know, yeah, it's kind of that systems level thinking of how everything kind of fits together and the impacts that we have, and can have on the world around us. So, yeah, really fascinating stuff. And I guess, you know, as we're kind of moving on here in terms of just like trying to, work better to kind of integrate this kind of, you know, educational philosophy or, just to better understand it, anything like that of just in terms of, you know, the resources that you could point, you know, parents and families to, or, anybody just like, you know, maybe it's stuff that, you're kind of consuming that's kind of grabbing your attention, or stuff that you feel like is a really good resource, like a good go-to. We'll certainly, have ways to connect with Natural Creativity Center in the show notes and everything. But anything in particular that you want to give kind of a tip of the hat to that we could link out to as well. And I guess for this one, I could start with Bonnie, if you want to kick us off for this one.
Sure. I encourage folks who are listening to go to the Unschooled the Movement website, unschooledthemovement.com. So we've got wide symphony of resources there, including resources and content from natural creativity. And when we come across interesting articles or conversations or TED Talks or pieces, we actually post them in our resource section. So it's an interesting go-to. So encourage folks to go to the unschooledthemovement.com website.
I second that. At Natural Creativity, we've been, because of our relative age and our focus, very internally focused. So a lot of our resources that we've come to rely on and produce are really context specific. And I'm certainly happy to share those with anyone, as far as a part of a conversation where we can talk about what's the moral to the story for their specific context. But Bonnie's point about having Unschooled the Movement .com available as particularly as a resource archive and a way to keep up with this sort of thing in real time is a really helpful piece.
Awesome. Yeah, it's good to have that kind of evolving hub of resources and stuff there. So we'll definitely link out to that. Well, then I guess sort of on that point, in addition to those things, it's going to be kind of I think the primary place for folks to go for, kind of follow up on this. But anything for either of you, just in terms of like other stuff that you're reading or listening to, like podcasts or audiobooks and those sort of things, like anything that is just like personally or professionally related that you'd want to kind of highlight, because I think it's just cool to see like the stuff that folks on the podcast are consuming. And certainly sometimes we're seeing like these really interesting people all kind of consuming the same stuff, which I think will hopefully provide a pattern and be like, oh my gosh, I gotta go check that out. So many so many cool people are listening to that podcast or something. So I'm just curious, anything that you are seeing out there that's really just been resonating that you might want to give a shout out to, in addition, obviously, to like all the resources that are going to be in the Unschooled website there. But anything that might come to mind.
Well, I'll jump in and say that I will say over the past few months, I've become much more judicious on what I listen to and read, because there's just a cacophony of noise that can either profoundly frustrate me or scare me or send me into whatever emotion there is. So I find myself being very narrow, far more narrow than I've been before around what I consume. My daily go-to, frankly, is the daily. So I'm sure you've heard that from other folks before, but I find that just sort of an even-handed conversation.
You caught me on a good day, because I was just celebrating the fact that with two young people in my house under the age of 4, and the work for Natural Creativity, I have just recently finished a book that I've been working on for about 8 months, 10 pages a night, Sapiens, which has been a really fascinating read. I do like to catch John Oliver. His show, I think, especially during the pandemic, has been a really helpful resources for sort of consolidating around issues and looking outside of it and being able to laugh. And the next book I'm looking to take on is a book, Decolonizing Nonviolent Communication. We at Natural Creativity use nonviolent communication as a framing tool for how we understand the individual, young people, families, and conflict. And it's a wonderful set of tools. It is also potentially rooted in some a more privileged practices that are always looking to be mindful of checking our privilege and our assumptions. And so I want to dig into that and really see how we can revise our practice. I also have started listening to a new podcast, The Parent Scoop, by a former colleague and now friend at University of Penn Graduate School of Education. It's meant to be a place for people to gather and talk about education issues from practitioners and policymakers who are actual parents. So it's a place to sort of let the rubber hit the road.
The film Unschooled has been shown at a variety of film festivals and conferences across the country, and most recently a virtual screening hosted by South by Southwest EDU. We'd love for higher ed geek listeners to join us at our next screening. And if folks go to unschooledthemovement.com and sign up for the newsletter, they'll be able to find out when the next time the film is screened and the next panel conversation, et cetera. So I encourage your listeners to do that.
Yeah, as we wrap up here, I wanted to make sure that, we kind of clarified that of where folks can catch the film or just get the latest news and stuff of when it might be available elsewhere, anything like that. So definitely make sure to have that linked specifically as best we can down the show notes. But yeah, I mean, I've seen the film. It's a great watch. I mean, it's just such a interesting snapshot into this, unique model and these student stories. And if you get the opportunity, by all means, I mean, especially just being able to have the opportunity, for those facilitated panel discussions and stuff too. I feel like just processing this, like for me now, this has been like amazing. So I'm hoping, folks can also kind of have their own opportunity to do this as well, in addition to this awesome conversation. So, thank you so much for all that you shared and being willing to hang out here for the podcast for a little bit. And we'll definitely, again, have all the ways to connect with all the resources and stuff down in the show notes. So thanks again for your time, everybody.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you, Dustin.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the podcast. Make sure to rate, review, and subscribe so you never miss an episode. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you in the next episode of the Higher Ed Geek Podcast.